All right, good evening. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. We're going to look this evening, Lord willing, at the first 15 verses. We are going to debunk what a lot of people love about these passages. We're going to anger Hobby Lobby, and hopefully we're going to arrive somewhere closer to the truth once we get finished. Cut down the sales on plaques. That is my express written goal tonight. Let's offer a word of prayer, and then we'll look at the text. Our Lord and our God, thank you for this good day. Thank you for the way you have extended your kindness to us to give us a Savior, to tell us of Jesus and what he did for us, to offer to us the idea of forgiveness. Father, thank you for that. Thank you for allowing us to come to you through Jesus. And we beg, Father, for your forgiveness for those times in which we don't, the times in which we decide our own way is better than yours. We thank you for the great patience you've shown us. Lord, please be with us as we study tonight from this text and help us to understand the point that is being made here and to draw from it what was meant to be learned. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, let's start by getting it in front of us. First 8 verses of Ecclesiastes 3. I'll need one volunteer for this and one volunteer for the second half. Sandy, you'll have verses 1 through 8, and then if somebody will be ready on verse 9, that'll help. All right, go ahead.
For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, time to seek and time to lose, time to keep and time to cast away, time to fear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace.
Okay, 9 through 15. Go ahead, Thomas.
What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it, so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, and which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away.
All right, very good. So a couple structural notes before we go after the way people normally take this. In the first 8 verses, after the sort of introduction of, for a time, there's a season and a time for everything, you have how many pairs of contrast or opposites? Anybody go through and count them? 14, okay. 14, you can do a lot of silly things with the numbers. It is 7 times 2. Some have decided to take these as couplets, as in both lines from verse 2 go together, both lines from verse 3 go together, and that sort of works. I mean, I can kind of see where people go with that. Verse 8 is a great time to see that, right? Love, hate, war, peace, kind of big meaty issues. Whether that's even helpful, I'm not sure, but that's at least the way it sort of breaks down. And then following this great list, which most people take as, motivation, Kohelet turns to the point. What gain has the worker from his toil? We're going to think about why he would say that in verse 9, following all the things that he said, verses 1 through 8. That is sort of our existence contrasted with the way God is described here. This is the most we've heard about God so far in the book. We're going to hear more about him later. But the 2 big things Kohelet tells us from 9 to 15 is that, 1, the situation from 1 to 8 is God's doing. He is the one that has set this in motion. He is the one that has said, this is the way the world works, and this is kind of how things are going to go. you see some descriptions of the way God has designed man to be able to perceive things as beautiful, to understand some idea of eternity, although not in its fullness. And then you see that again in verse 12, the same conclusion we got back in chapter 2. There is nothing better than to be joyful and do good as long as you live. That's another version of kind of eat, drink, and be merry, right? That we talked about a little bit last week. What happens in the first 8 verses is contrasted in 14 and 15 with the way God operates. And we're going to think why that's a good thing in just a second. How many of you have seen the artwork or seen some version of verse 1 in like a pleasant, embroidered way, right? Have you ever seen this sort of thing? For everything, there's a season. And because it has the word season in it, we think, oh, you mean like spring, summer, fall, winter. Great, here's another one, right? Everything, there's a season, and there's a purpose for. So everything that happens for a reason, and we can be okay because God knows the reason for that. And I'm not discounting that idea. That is true. But that's not what he's saying here. You see it written in all kinds of, I think this is a charcuterie board with if everything, there's a season. And I told you I was going after Hobby Lobby. That's because Hobby Lobby went after the text and decided they would follow suit and make money off of it. If you have $5.49, you can buy whatever that is from them. Yeah. But is that what Koheleth is doing? I'm going to suggest to you no. Read the book, right? Most Bible questions are answered by reading more of it, right? And this is one of those cases. The book is an examination of life under the sun. If you remove God from the equation and look at all the other variables and where all of it boils down to, what do you have left? He tells you the answer in the opening line of the book. Vanity of vanities. If you take God out of the equation doesn't make any sense, right? Everything is wasted. Everything is pointless and hopeless. That's what the book's been telling us so far. The book told us in chapter 1 that the world is a great big treadmill, and everything on it just keeps happening over and over except for one. What's that one? Everything on earth is cyclical except for what? Human beings. Everything on earth just kind of starts over and does its thing over and over and over except for us, right? And the earth keeps cycling, and eventually we're just forgotten. We're the one thing that doesn't persist. Because of that, everything's vanity. Everything's like trying to grasp the wind. We're told because of Koheleth's experiments, we of course think he's Solomon, that there's no hope to be found in pleasure, in possessions, in being wise, or being foolish. Nothing you do changes the math of what happens when you take God out of the equation. We're told at the end of chapter 2, what we studied last week, death renders everything meaningless. Even the wisdom that you decide to live with is not going to do you any good. Even the things you acquire by wisdom are going to be given when you die to people who have no regard for how you live, right? And then we get this passage. Oh, but don't worry, because everything happens for a reason. And then we're right back to it in verse 9, right? What gain is there? What point is there to working? And then you see 14 and 15. God's the one who is eternal. We are not. And when we get into the latter bit of chapter 3, the second big problem of Ecclesiastes gets introduced. There are 3 big problems in the book. The first one is death. We've seen that already. The second one is wickedness. The third one is chance. Stuff just kind of happens and we don't really have a way to control it, right? Those are the 3 big issues. Whatever those 8 verses mean, it follows Koheleth's larger argument, right? So what is he trying to say when he mentions for everything there's a season, and then gives us 14 examples of that? Everybody except for Mark. What is Newton's third law of motion? You know this one from your high school physics class? I was a math major. We didn't care for all the yucky science stuff. Yep.
I think that's the one where everything in motion tends to stay in motion unless...
That's either 1 or 2. I don't remember which one because I was a math major. Which one is this?
For every action, there is
Equal and opposite.
Yep. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, right? You didn't think you were going to get physics tonight, but it's actually going to help out. It explains a lot of the stuff that happens in our world. When you fire a firearm, right? There is a force that propels the bullet down range, and there is a force that pushes backward on the firearm, right? Equal and opposite. If you let go of a balloon with air in it, right? Air goes down, balloon goes up, equal and opposite. Mark doesn't know anything about the one in the bottom left, but he could explain that at length, so I'm not going to let him. Here's the image I want you to put in your mind for just the next, say, 5 minutes, right? A person pushing against a wall demonstrates this principle, right? The wall is immobile, but the person can apply force to the wall. Well, what happens physics-wise? Well, I am pushing the wall, and the wall is pushing back with equal and opposite force. That's why when you do that, hopefully nothing happens, right? I'm not that big.
I built that wall.
You built that wall, so if something happens, we know where to go.
Did it move on you?
It did not, thankfully. Let me check it. But I want you to think about this, right? If I push the wall and the wall pushes back with equal force, what have I accomplished? Nothing. Does it mean I'm not putting a lot of effort into it? Does it mean the wall's not pushing? I haven't done anything at the end of the day, right? I can stand here for the rest of the night and do that, and then go home, and everybody who comes in tomorrow will have no idea that that happened, right? This is Koheleth's argument in the first 8 verses of chapter 3. Think about it. He says, for everything there's a season, there's a time for everything under heaven. What does he say first? There is a what?
Time to be born.
There's a time to be born
Time to die.
and a time to die. Even something that you had no ability to have anything to do with, being born, is counteracted by its equal and opposite, right? Dying. And unless somebody told you about someone who had lived in the past, you wouldn't know they were there, absent some other evidence, right? What does he say next? There is a what?
Time to plant.
Time to plant
Time to sow.
and a time to tear up or pluck up what's planted, right? What happens at the end of the day once the planting and the plucking have happened? Nothing. It goes back the way it was. There is a time to kill and there is a time to heal. There's a time to break and there's a time to build up. There is a time to weep. There's a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn. There's a time to dance. And just in case we didn't see that, he says it 14 times. One theory on the reason why it's 14, 7's a good biblical number, right? 7's a complete number. You remember the line from Genesis when Joseph is explaining why Pharaoh receives the same dream twice? Joseph tells Pharaoh the doubling of the thing means it's certain. So when Koheleth says 7 times, twice, that no matter what you do, no matter what happens to you, there is an equal and opposite undoing of that thing in our world, right? This is the world we live in. So now here's your question. If everything we do has an undoing, what progress have we made? Everything we do has an undoing of the same thing. What have we managed to accomplish? You could ask it this way. If everything we do has an undoing, what difference do we make? None. When you look at the world absent God, when you look at the world purely from the top-down, humanistic, secular view, and you look at everything in the grand scheme of things, all things cancel out and nothing's been done. This is why, what does he say in verse 9? It's not a real question, it's a rhetorical question. What does he say in verse 9 of the chapter? What gain does the worker have from his toil? What's the answer? None. It's a rhetorical question. The answer is the opposite of the way it's stated. He's not curiously going, I wonder what you actually get. He just made his point. What is the point of all of these things that we do if all of them have an undoing? There is no point, right? What gain has the worker? No gain. Whose fault is it that the world's this way? Not according to Koheleth in chapter 3. What's the very next line? I have seen the busyness that what? That God has given to the children of man.
Except I'd argue it's man because of sin.
Man provided the reason why this was set up the way that it was.
That's why I answered it that way.
And I would agree with that wholeheartedly, right? Man was the catalyst that made this the way God left the world to be, right? What's beautiful about the beginning of this chapter, though, what's the difference between this scenario and God, according to Koheleth? When God does something, what's the difference? 14 and 15. Whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it nor taken from it. God has done it so that the people before him. When it comes to God, when he creates, there is no force somewhere uncreating. When he destroys, there's no necessary force on the other side that makes it come back the way it was. All of the ways that we don't wind up accomplishing anything, again, apart from God, God's not subject to that rule set. There was no let there be not light somewhere when God spoke light into being. It still is, right? That's the difference between us and him. And his argument is that we should fear him because of that, and rightly so. We are creatures bound in ultimate futility. God's not that way. And the world was left like this so that we would find him, so that we would look for him. I'm going to read you another verse. Or I'm going to do this first, and then I'm going to get to the verse, because it's coming up, but it's not next. Right? This is the reason why there in the book I said, under the sun we are imprisoned by the temporal tides of necessity and circumstance. Time and tides eventually take over everything, and there's really nothing we can do about it because it's God's fault that the world is bounded in this way. He chose to leave it this way. And that's an easy thing to prove. If he wanted it some other way, it would have been some other way. He's left the world in this circumstance. But he hasn't left us without hope, according to the first 15 verses. Go back in your Bible. Look at verse 11. It is God's doing that man has been left in this endless, pointless busyness. But he hasn't left us without hope because God has done a couple of things that will enable us to escape that. Number one, he gave us the capacity to recognize beauty. The capacity to know that something was better than another thing. To prefer it, to seek after it. The world's all kinds of different colors because God left it that way. Honey tastes great because God left it that way. Right? We're able to perceive that some things are better than others. Some things are desirable, and we're drawn towards those things that are more desirable than other things. Not only that, what else has God done? What's the next thing in the chapter? He's made everything beautiful in its time. That's him. What else happens?
Puts eternity in man's heart.
He has given us some capacity to understand eternity. And that's what the next verse says, right? He has put eternity in man's heart, yet, the ESV says, so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. If God understands eternity in its fullness, if that's a contradiction of terms, but you follow me on this, we understand it in part, or in a piece of it. We have a sense of the forever. We have a sense of infinite. We have a sense of there being more than what's available in the finite world. But not enough to be able to see it the way God does. Why? Why did God leave it this way? Why did God leave the world as a sandcastle in the ocean, but then give the inhabitants of that sandcastle the ability to see what was good and the ability to recognize something of eternity? Why does the Koheleth say that happened at 14 and 15? The people fear him. We would be drawn to recognize him, and we would be drawn to know something of him, to fear him. It would lead us to him. It would draw us that direction. Why else leave the human race in futility, but give us the ability to understand that there is a God and that he is desirable and that he is beyond us and above us and stronger than us and all those other things? It's to pull us that direction. It's to pull us back from that world that is ultimately futile when you think about it without him. I'm going to give you a passage. You probably didn't think to connect it here, and I didn't either. When Paul is talking to the Athenians in Acts 17, he said something, and I don't know that I ever fully understood it until preparing for this text. When God describes how God from one man made every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, the next line I don't think is referring to Well, God made the Spaniards to live in Spain, and God made the Chinese to live in China, and God made the Japanese to live on the Isle of Japan, and He made the Americans to live here. I don't think that's what He's saying. He made every race of mankind to live on the earth, determine the allotted points, boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and feel their way toward Him and find Him. I think the boundaries are what He's talking about in Ecclesiastes 3, and what He's talking about in Ecclesiastes 1. God has set boundaries around all of us, and He has made life without Him ultimately meaningless, so that we would see it and we would return to that circumstance. Yes, sir.
I think that's why man understands so well, that where there is a law, there must be a law given.
Yes,
Where we
exactly.
see information and majesty and beauty, we understand that there must be an intelligent designer behind that thing. Because we know with our reason that He gave us, something doesn't come from nothing.
Right.
When we see chaos and then all of a sudden there's order and law, we know that someone orchestrated it to be that way.
Right.
And then from there, we could see, the evidence is all around us. The Bible gives us a lot of clues and hints in that way of how we can keep our eyes open for those.
We've been set in a world that is futile, and everything we do in it is futile. And that's on purpose, to point us back toward the God that we forsook all those generations ago, right? Two hands. Kendrick, you're first.
And then the end of that last verse, it says, so that we may fear Him,
Yeah.
or be in awe of Him. And then it reminded me, Proverbs 9:10, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Exactly. That's the first thing you got to have, right? That's the kernel that all of it gets solved by over and over. It's a recognition of that there is a God and that He's to be feared, right? Existence and quality. Yeah.
And then the second part of that verse, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So He gives us that inherent void in our heart that will lead us to Him, and then we can understand why not only are we there, but what to do from Him.
Right. He set the world up to draw us back to Himself. Mark?
I was gonna say, the idea of eternity in the heart is, man among all of creation has the unique ability, as far as we understand, no other creature on earth has the ability to understand something that's truly abstract.
Mhm.
Man understand calculus, A goes from 1 to infinity. Well, the concept, infinity is a concept.
Mhm.
It doesn't exist in reality. Fractional numbers, things, they don't exist in reality. They're a concept, and man among all the creatures is the one that understands things that aren't real. We can visualize, conceptualize.
I would say things that aren't physical.
Right.
Right. I mean, the spiritual reality is real. It's just not physical, tangible, that type of thing. Okay, I'm so sorry. I talk long enough. I talk way too much. Was there something you liked, something you saw? I maybe should have asked this before I set off, but I don't know. I got excited about it, so forgive me for that. Anything you saw, anything you noticed? If not, we're going to hop to some questions. Something you want to bring up? Yep, and Sean, you're next. Or actually, Sean, if you'll go first, because Kendrick has had a turn.
So obviously I don't think about this life as a game, but to your point, this life is a filter to some degree. I mean, everything that happens to you in this life, or everything that you go through, or everything that you see, is either gonna draw you to God or push you away from God.
Mhm.
It's all how you deal with it in your heart, whether you're receptive to His word and that sort of thing. So I guess kind of go along with what you're saying, that there is a purpose for everything. It's to draw us to, you gotta be careful how I say that. I'm not saying that there's a purpose in every single little thing, but as we go through this life, all the different things that He lists in 1 through 8, everything that we see and happen to us can draw us to God if we use that purpose.
Yeah, and the thing in the first 8 verses is when we look at everything and we notice that everything has an opposite, and those opposites cancel and nothing's left, it forces us to go, well, is there something more? Is there something higher? Is there something other than just endless futility and we die and then that's it, right? It's designed that way to make us look for it, for the thing, yes.
And the hinge point is God, obviously, so 1 through 8 is complete vanity without God. 1 through 8 with God is learning, wisdom, and understanding, and growing closer to Him, so.
Yeah. 9 and following explains why 1 and 8 is the case, right? And the purpose for that. Kendrick, did you have a?
Yeah, what I find interesting is, in going back to your wall example.
Yeah.
Right? That means nothing. If you do it by yourself, how miserable, right? But if you were to spend the day there with another person, 2 other people, the people that you choose to put in your life, no matter what you do, standing and holding up a wall, that doesn't, it is what it, but this life is about the people that we do these useless, dumb tasks with, right? It's about those relationships. It's about about the journey.
Well, and it's trying to see that through those tasks, there's something more important, there's something bigger. There's something that actually does have purpose and meaning. And it's not just endlessly cycling between killing and not killing, or building and not building, or eating and not eating, right? There's something more than that. And it's designed that way to point us to that other thing. Mark, last one.
Yeah, I was gonna say, another way to look at the vanity of this, I was considering this, the idea that I can do things that are right in themselves and do them in the wrong season. There's even that aspect of this, that, I'm doing the time to kill and a time to heal,
Yeah.
well, I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm doing maybe the right thing at the wrong time. So there's another aspect of vanity to that. I can be doing the right thing, and if I'm doing it in the wrong season,
Yeah.
then it's wasted.
And I agree, there is a right and a wrong time for a thing to happen. I don't know that that's his point here, right? It's that there's an appropriate time for, appropriate's the wrong word, because some things we think there's never an appropriate time for, but it just seems when you look at our world, right? If you look at our world without a moral compass, just sort of look at it as the way it is, and without God, well, you notice that sometimes we fight and sometimes we don't. And it just, it seems to cancel each other out. There's a time in which we put fabric together and a time in which we take it apart. When you're looking at the world absent God, it just endlessly swirls and nothing really changes, right? You're just shuffling the deck chairs, right? Nothing's happening to the ship. You're just changing meaningless points of information. Okay, some easy questions. What genre of scripture would you classify 1 through 8? If you had to call it a certain type of scripture, you would call it what? Poetry. I think it's pretty plain, right? It doesn't rhyme to us. It doesn't have to. You have thought rhymes, not just sound rhymes. But you can kind of see it's the same sort of thing happening over and over, and that tends to be more of a poetic thing.
It's also a part of wisdom.
It's in that larger scope of wisdom literature, right? But within the literature, you have prose, and you have poetry, and you have, things like that.
Many times.
Mhm.
In that.
Proverbs kind of does some of that, a little bit back and forth. So there's a little bit of that, all right? We talked about this one. How many contrasts are there? There are 14 sets of contrasts. What characteristics has God given man's busyness? We talked about that a little bit already. God has made us what? Or what capacities has God given us? We can recognize some version of eternity, right?
And beauty.
And we recognize beauty, right? And we can obviously see that those things are leading us to that. How does verse 15 describe God? Verse 15 describes God as what? There's some element of timelessness, right? There's some element of God goes after the things that we cannot. He goes to places we can't. He does things we can't, right? He is not bounded in the same ways that we are, right? The things that have been driven away to us that we can't ever go deal with, He can, right? You remember David's comment about his child when his child passed away? He said, I shall go to him, but he shall not come to me, right? There's a limitation. There's an idea of no matter what happens next, there's no coming from the reverse, right? God's not bounded in that sense. He seeks the thing that's been driven away, and you can take that in a number of ways. Yes?
I think it also shows that he looks at things with a critical eye and takes account of each person and their actions. We know that through other
Certainly.
scriptures as well. But when you look at these other things, it's just kind of, they're just meaningless. They're things, well, they're not meaningless, but they're things that are happening. They're gonna happen regardless and for whatever reason. But when God looks at things, contrary to the way that man does, he looks at them with a critical eye and to see, have you done either good or bad? Have you spoken evil or spoken well? Have you built up or have you tore down? Have you killed or have you, so it's good that we, understand that God is not,
It's different.
kind of as we are, where, if you're not a Christian, maybe the denominational world or wherever else, they don't give it any account. It's like a nihilistic way of looking at things. There is no moral truth, there is no law. When you go in the ground, you're dirt and that's it. Where
Yeah.
God says, no, as you live is as you will in the after.
As with as many things as we can accomplish, we're still made in the image of our Creator. We're not made to His level, to His capacity, to His power, to His intelligence. We are depictions of Him, right? We are not Him, and that's part of what the chapter sort of is throwing at us. Okay, we would talk about what this meant to them, the original audience, a little bit, and because I decided to rant, we kind of ran a little short on time, so I'm going to go straight to number 5. Koheleth has made the argument that life is futile under the sun without God a couple of times already. How is the way he does it in the first 8 verses different from the way he did it verses in chapters 1 through 2? Right? He's making the same argument, he's making it a different way. How is it different? Kimberly?
I think here he made it more blunt, like by doing it in poem, by saying there is this, and then there is this, and those still equal neutral, right? Like it's a lot more quick to the point, blunt. Like you can have this whole list of things, but if you put an equal sign after all of them, they would still be neutral.
That's a good way of putting that. All those, I love it because it's math. If you add them all up, it adds up to nothing, right? And that's what verse 9 says. What'd you gain from all this? Well, you didn't gain anything because everything cancels out in the end, right?
And even like we feel like some of them doesn't equal net neutral. Like I was kind of looking at it, I can see if you plant something and then you cook it up, then that equals neutral. But to us, we're like, well, if there's a war and then there's peace, things have still changed after that. But then you kind of zoom out and go, well, maybe there isn't.
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, have they? In that sense. In 1 and 2, the idea was more along the lines of the things that happen to us, right? The place where we live, the earth is cyclical and sort of never changing, but always changing, and we're the only thing that doesn't seem to last on it. There's the things we sort of go after on the earth, and those wind up being pointless. But this section, and she brought up the idea of it being blunt. These are the things that we do and the things that happen to us. This is life on this earth, right? It is characterized, this isn't an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty good one, of just all the way from the most mundane of things to the most significant and abstract and big deal of things. And it doesn't matter how small of a thing or how big of a thing we do. It all just adds up to nothing, right, at the end. Again, without God in the picture. You got to remember that's the perspective. Yes?
I feel like 1 and 2, there was a lot of I did this, I did that.
That's a good point, too.
I did this. And now he's saying God, right? Now he's bringing in God, like, I did all of these things, but this is the way God has it set. And so I feel like he starts to bring that around.
That's another, I didn't notice that. You're exactly right. Instead of just saying, this is my lived experience, he's saying, this is all of us. This is where we are. Yes?
But I think chapter 3 only works after you've had that lived experience in chapters 1 and 2, right? Because essentially what he's working from is like all of this deduction in chapters 1 and 2. This is my lived experience.
Mhm.
And then we're coming to these sort of golden principles.
Yeah.
This is kind of how the cycle works. You just have chapters 1 and 2, it all kind of leads to like nothing. In chapter 3, there's more reassurance because it is a cycle and there is someone in control of that cycle.
We've zoomed out just a bit, right? He's made the argument that I've lived this and it wound up being pointless. Now he's sort of opening up going, we've all lived this and all of us now realize it's pointless. But God's in control of that pointlessness, right? He is the one managing that and he has set the rules for that. We'll think about why here in a minute. What do all of the topics in verses 1 through 8 have in common? This may be a sort of an easy cop-out answer, but I thought it was an interesting one. What do you notice they all have in common? A what?
Time.
Time. They all have a time in common. And if you look down at the world without God, if you just look at it from like the satellite view, well, it seems like there's a time for just about anything you want to think of. Right, wrong, feels bad, feels good. You know, bad and good aren't really under consideration here in this chapter. This isn't the place where we go to our Bible and we say, precious in the Lord's sight is the death of his saints. That is a valuable point. That's not what he's saying here, right? Koheleth isn't saying, well, you know, there's just a right time for everyone to die. That's not what he's saying. He's saying if you look at the world as it is without God, it seems like there's a time to be born and there's a time to not be born. And those two things seem to equal nothing when you add them all up, right? He's not saying, you know, whether or not it happened at the time that feels best to us. He's just saying that they did. Yes, sir. And Lanny, you'll be next.
Oh, just because of the.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry, when you pointed somebody.
No, sir, you're up and then Lanny's after you.
Okay. After this list of the first 8 verses, this next few statements, I think, define why he's using this. What gain has the worker from his toil?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the business that God has given the children of men to be busy with. He's made everything beautiful in his time. He's put eternity in the man's heart so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. He said, I perceive that there's nothing better for men to do than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in his toil. This is God's gift.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not just the futilities there, but for me, going through life, to realize there's a time for birth and a time for death is important. There's a time to plant and a time to reap, and there's a time to kill in the hill. I mean, you think about it. There's a time when they're policemen, I'm glad that they take their weapon out and eliminate somebody because of their wickedness. And all of this is a part of God's plan to drive us to him, that we could fear him.
What do you take with verse 8? In that what you described, and I appreciate it.
There's a time to love and a time to hate, even God hates.
Mhm.
And there are some things that we should hate.
True.
There's a time for war and there's a time for peace. You think about the good thing that happened, that we entered the World War II. And we're able to give peace to people in another part of the world because of, that's what God uses to control the governments of men, war.
I take the gift of I take God giving the gift sort of in the same way as back in chapter 2, that this is what God has left for men to do. There's nothing better than for God to have left men in this circumstance. Not saying God didn't make our world pleasurable and he didn't make our world with some enjoyment and to have a sense of when to do those things, but that was done with a purpose, right? Like you mentioned, to drive us toward him, to pull us this direction, to say, well, there must be a God in control of all of this, right? I think that was the big overall point I wanted to make sure we made. He's perceived in verse 12, there's nothing better for them than to be joyful and do good as long as they live. If mankind is happy and they do good things as long as they live, but they don't turn to God, what have they managed to accomplish?
Lost their soul.
It's all been for naught, right? It's all been for a waste. Yes, sir?
I don't know if Laney still had a comment or not, but if he does, I have one after.
Oh, well, that's my memory. See, there's a time to learn and there's a time to forget. Okay, and I did both there. Laney, did you have a thought?
Just all these things that
All things that men and people on this earth go through. These are all things that are mentioned in this, the busyness of man.
This is across time, across culture.
A lot of times each one of us goes through everything that's mentioned.
Absolutely. This is our experience. Sean?
So I did have a question about verse 13 and that phrase, gift of God. I'm just curious. I have no idea what the original language says there, but I'm curious.
Well, I don't either, so we're in good shape.
I'm just curious if it means, obviously, we have a positive context for gift of God, but I'm just curious, is it actually meaning gift of God like we would think of gift of God, or is it more God-given like in the previous couple verses?
I think it's in the God-given sense, right? Instead of being the given is the verb and gift is the sort of the noun version of it, right? To me, that makes more sense. It sort of ties it with chapter 2, and it's going to tie it with things we're going to see later. That's my take on it. It could be wrong or it could be off. There's a time to be right and a time to be wrong, right? And we all go through that, and I cycle faster than others.
The original word means reward. It's matah. It's just a reward, somebody giving you something because you've done a good thing, not because we just like your face. It's just random. It's a reward.
People have suggested one day is a list of all the things God does in our world. Agree or disagree? I bring this up because people bring this up. So what do you think?
I disagree.
Why is that?
I think this is man recognizing the utility of what he does.
Yeah.
This is what man does in God's world.
Yeah. What perspective is Kohelet taking? He's taking the perspective of this is the world without God, right?
Right.
And when you look at the satellite view and you point your head down and you look at the world, this is it, right? This is what happens. It's not making the point that, well, sometimes God heals and sometimes God kills and sometimes God hates and sometimes God loves. Those are true, mind you. But I don't think that's the point here, right? Those are certainly true and we can prove that elsewhere. I don't think that's his point here, right? He's saying something else. Did I have a different question? I did. Yep.
Can I add something to?
Sure.
Okay, I think kind of nestled in that is a slightly other false view that some people have. I don't think it would be right to look at this and say that God created the world and then just stepped back and took his hands off the steering wheel.
Yeah.
That is something that some people believe, and I think this is not where you can go to like prove that, but it also is perhaps true that God is not like, pieces on a chessboard meditating, making all of this happen.
Yeah.
So
It's a view of, does God have like atomic control of the world, right? Does he control every molecule and every atom and how it moves? Or did he just snap his fingers and the world existed and he stood back and crossed his arms?
Right.
It's neither of those, right? Those are two extremes on the same thing. Somewhere in the middle is, I think we're best to put that. Okay. No, I didn't want that one. Where's the one I wanted? No. Oh, okay. 12. 12 is the one I wanted. Sorry. We're short on time, so we got to get to that one. This is in the application. This is for us time, right? How does the return of Jesus change the situation we see in the text? How does that change the math of what he's described for us here in these 15 verses? What does the return of Jesus do to this view of the world? Yep.
It gives it like a stopping point. Like how when Mark was saying, something is from one to infinity, it's not from one to infinity, there's like a recognizing thing to it.
There is a line drawn, and it's a line in which this sort of living in this sort of world stops. Everything past that doesn't follow those rules. And thankfully so, because past that line, remember the way it's described when Jesus returns and the church is reunited with God? What are the things that are said to end in that context? There will be no more what? No more war, no more crying, no more tears, no more death. It's amazing to me how many of the negative things in these 8 verses are said to come to an end when that happens. Right? Yes.
I think to go along with that, at the end of verse 15, to my earlier point, it says, and God requires an account of what is past. To see that he has said in all of the Old Testament, this thing will come to fruition, he will be the Messiah, and he will judge. There is a right and a wrong. And now when you see him come, you know for certain that this is in fact the case. There is an account required of everything that we do, because there is a finality to this life, but not to the one in the hereafter.
Right.
And you will give an account for that either way, and be either found in fault, or in lockstep with God's justice.
Yeah, Jesus' return means that what we do is not futile. What we do is not pointless. It's not just shuffling one side to the other. It has a meaning, and it has a point, and it has a reward, and there's an eternity aspect to that. All right, we're out of time. My apologies. Let's think next week about from 16 down to 4, verse 8. I know it's an odd break for the verses, but that's just sort of what happened. All right, 3:6, or not next week, the week following. New song practice is next week. On the 4th, we're going to have 16 down to 4:8. All right, thank you, guys.